Hey everyone, my name is Catalyst, welcome back to the channel. So it's been a week exactly since the Battlefield 2042 reveal trailer, and I'm pretty excited about what we've seen so far, and it appears like the community is excited too. The reveal trailer reached over 1 million likes, and is the second most liked Battlefield trailer in history behind Battlefield 1 of course. The game appears to have a concrete tone and direction and looks to be a pretty action-packed love letter to Battlefield 4. But that being said, even though the reception of the game has been mostly positive, there are still some big concerns floating around because we still don't know too much about the game's major mechanics and how they'll all play together. We still have also yet to know about crossplay and to what extent there will be an aggressive anti-cheat system for PC. Those are things I'm sure will be addressed later, more than likely at EA Play next month. In the meantime, there was a developer briefing on Tuesday. Community manager Part Welsh spoke with DICE general manager Oscar Gabrielson, design director Daniel Berlin, and other DICE developers, and they discussed what we saw in the trailers last week, including specialists and the plus system. They also addressed the new Conquest and breakthrough introducing clusters in Conquest, which are the short miniature objectives that make up the large sectors that we know to be flags in classic Conquests. The briefing did a lot for me personally to clarify how all-out warfare works, but it also continues to validate my biggest concern when it comes to Battlefield 2042, and that's just how in the hell DICE plans to balance all of this. I've mentioned this a few times already, but I wanted to directly address it in a separate video. Not to be a negative Nancy about what for the most part is a game looking to be on the right track, but because the game's main selling point appears to be this unprecedented scale, and of course the bigger the game is, the harder it is to balance everything. Balancing Battlefield games has not always been the easiest task because at its core, Battlefield has so many moving parts, bells and whistles, it's hard to find balance without making compromises in some areas. To not only balance infantry combat between players with give or take 30 to 40 infantry weapons, but also balance infantry interactions between ground and air vehicles and interactions between the ground and air vehicles themselves, and not only do that, but to form a meta that is fun to play without being overbearing for one side. Like, that task just sounds impossible to me, to be honest. And seeing how long this franchise has been alive, they must get it right more than they get it wrong, but there has never been a game like Battlefield 2042. It's easy for you to say, well, this is their game, they've spent years building this game from the ground up, just trust them to make the right decisions to balance the game. But Battlefield has never gone to this scale before, and as much as we don't know what to expect, you've got to imagine that DICE doesn't really know either. You can playtest your game internally as much as you want, but until real players get their hands on the game, you don't quite know how the game is going to play. Battlefield has never lent itself to that very well, and there have been some times where DICE gets the balance spot on, and other times they don't. And I think the real emphasis here is on the balance between infantry and vehicles, specifically in Battlefield 2042. Battlefield 5 suffered horribly from something often described as indirect fire. The moments where, for instance, you were innocently running across a field in a Ross with nobody around you, and then you instantly explode and die to a Tiger tank an entire objective away, and there was nothing that you could really do about it. And that was incredibly frustrating for a lot of players, especially because what they were getting killed by often required no outplay or mechanical skill, whereas in Battlefield 4, if you're getting killed repeatedly by a good little bird pilot, you would be, well, incredibly pissed off, I'm sure, but you would at least recognize the talent of the pilot because not every scrub in the server could so easily hop in the helicopter, fly effortlessly, and reproduce the same results, as opposed to knowing how piss easy tanks and planes were to use in Battlefield 5, and that any player could hop into a tank and do fairly well without any experience. And that's not to say that there aren't moments with indirect fire in other Battlefield titles, it just shows how a high skill ceiling in vehicles, and especially with gunplay and infantry, you kind of create a skill gap that balances things out naturally. Nothing is too overpowered, but if you get good enough in those vehicles, you can be a force to be reckoned with. So with all that being said, that brings me to Battlefield 2042. The major selling point of the game is the 128 players, the unprecedented scale of the game, as I've said, and that's been very evident in the marketing thus far for the game. The scale is mind-blowing when you take a look at the screenshot of how the 7 launch maps compare to some maps in other titles, and they are pretty huge. My biggest concern is how DICE is going to tastefully balance this extra scale to make both sides enjoyable to play. Everything has been blown up proportionally to fit 128 players, and the big question is how well 128 players are really going to fill out the maps that DICE have impressively created. My biggest worry is that balancing 2042 is going to be the game's biggest Achilles heel beyond outside factors such as game performance and anti-cheat. While accounting for the inflated player size, DICE have also seemed to increase the amount of and put a special emphasis back on vehicle gameplay as it was in Battlefield 4, and there are a lot of vehicles, even for a Battlefield game. In the gameplay trailer alone, on one map we saw multiple tanks that were already spawned in addition to call-in tanks that were available. Little birds, jets, Apaches, alligators, LVTs, LAVs, Ospreys. We know that there are boats on the Kaleidoscope map, and as of now it appears that you are allowed multiple types of each vehicle. With more vehicles on the map, it presents a challenge to make sure that vehicles are not overbearing on infantry but are also not outnumbered themselves. It's a very hefty double-edged sword. With a lot of emphasis also being put on moving around the map via transport vehicles, it's going to be very hard for infantry to move around the map if there is one team that has very dominant pilots, more so than in previous titles because of just how big Battlefield 2042 is. In previous titles, you might have been able to get away with it depending on how the map was designed, but because these sectors are so big and these maps are so huge, there are more and more opportunities and more chances that you're going to have to take to cross open field in Battlefield 2042, or at least that's the way that it appears with all of these trailers. This is just an example, but it's a very real concern for infantry players. The number of vehicles allowed on the map is going to be a huge balancing point, the eternal battle between infantry and vehicle players, and it's a battle that I would argue DICE have done a pretty poor job of balancing recently. But this isn't just an attack on vehicle players, because things are just as scary for them as well. You can see some of the early roots of the balancing dilemma with the specialists, which by far have been one of the more divisive features that have been revealed for the game so far. Some people are excited for them, others are skeptical, especially because weapons are now not locked by any one specific class. Personally, I welcomed the idea of having weapons being unlocked for every class, but that was under the assumption that gadgets were still going to be locked to their specific specialist. Now we know that equipment is completely customizable for every specialist and is not locked to particular specialists, just like primary weapons are not locked to any specific character. So that means you can theoretically have 100 plus players running around with rocket launchers and explosives. Now, just because there is the possibility of this happening doesn't mean that it will actually happen like that in-game. A lot of people are worried about balancing issues such as this before when, say, things like the Fliegerfaust entered the game, but the playing field is a little different in 2042. Sure, in past titles you didn't have to worry about one overpowered gadget too much because in the end there were already players who opted for other benefits from other classes. Maybe they liked weapons from a specific class, or maybe they were just dead set on having a personal heal. Stuff like that. In 2042, gadgets and throwables are all universally allocated. Players don't have to settle for choosing one over the other. They can have both, and that could be a huge problem. So those players who really liked SMGs and being able to heal themselves can also now equip some C4 and explosives. You take all of this into account, including map design and how these clusters of objectives play, you can absolutely see a future in which tanks camp off the objective to farm kills on infantry players in the sectors because of how overbearing the explosive spam is from the inflated player count. Or you have talented helicopter pilots on the other side of things constantly running for their lives due to an incessant amount of Stinger missiles. And again, this is not negativity just for the sake of being negative. I've said it many times in this video already, but Battlefield 2042 is being incredibly ambitious with its size and scale that is really unprecedented for a game that is not a battle royale. The core gameplay loop is of course essential to the game, but in Battlefield there are multiple types of gameplay loops depending on what you like to play, whether that be a jet, a helicopter, tank, or specialist, and no matter what you play, the experience should be rewarding and balanced, but that's easier said than done, and it's a real possibility that it's just all too much. To draw a comparison, and I realize that this may only relate to some of you, but it's like going back to visit your parents for the first time and you're sleeping on your old childhood bed. You may have totally outgrown that bed, arms and legs dangling from the sides, but yet it's still the bed you remember and it is a bed to sleep on. just much more uncomfortable to sleep on than you remember it being. Battlefield may be going back to its home, its bread and butter with modern combat, but they could be going back too large and trying to lay in a bed that is too small and uncomfortable for what they actually want to achieve. And of course, this is all hypothetical, and these concerns could be completely washed away once we get our hands on the beta or alpha and see for ourselves. And all of this is not to say that DICE can't end up balancing things pretty well, but at the root of it all, if you could summarize this video into one statement, it would be that I'm afraid that bigger is not better. And I'm afraid that this massive scale that DICE is aiming for will end up hurting the game in the long run more than helping it because of how difficult the scale may be to balance for all sides, infantry, pilots, and tanks. And with what this game means for the future of the franchise, especially after Battlefield 5, how much weight this game carries, I want nothing more than this game to be as balanced as possible and fun for all parties involved. That's the end of the video, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like as it helps me tremendously. Do you agree with me? What is your biggest concern as it pertains to Battlefield 2042, if you have any concerns at all? Once again, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. I will be posting tons of Battlefield 2042 and Battlefield 5 content leading up to the game's releasing. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday on Twitch at twitch.tv/catalyst_HD, so follow me there if you wish. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Catalyst, and I will see you all another time.